Block number 3, year number 8, let's talk about the primaries. So practice number 1 for team. We're gonna open up a back squat. The protocol is gonna be wave loading, 642, 642. So as we're breaking this down, one of the things that you wanna kind of wrap your head around is this synchronous relationship between exercises and the sets, reps, time under tension, intensity, rest that we're using, or the variables. Back squats, something that we can leverage higher absolute load, right? So we can actually have greater overall loads with a exercise that we have more mechanical advantage from the placement of that bar than we would if we were more or less mechanically advantaged. Back squat's a great conduit to increasing whatever motor unit threshold output that systemic load would have on the body. Now, the other end of this is it's still coming down to technique, execution, and going through. And I want to make a point of the notion that a exercise is superior to another one is kind of a silly conversation. A lot of times we'll hear people talk about, hey, back squat is the king of all exercises. That is a ridiculous term. Taking it from someone who works with now 700 people, 20 years in the industry working with hundreds, if not thousands of athletes, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, without any hesitancy, without any fear that this will be someday untrue, that back squat is not a superior exercise. It's just an exercise. It's one exercise in an infinite list of exercises that we could use to develop an athlete. Does it have a high potential for external load? Yeah, but doesn't a leg press? Like the logic of we can have higher external load for one exercise versus the other as a rationale as being superior is silly. That would mean like trap bar deadlift is a better exercise than traditional deadlift. That would mean that leg press is a superior exercise to back squat. That would mean that anything that we could just partial range of motion it, right? So I can do probably a limited range of motion from a pin or a block deadlift or squat. Would that make it superior than the original foundational version? And my point being is, although we are using this exercise within this set and rep scheme as a means to have greater systemic load, does not make that the end all be all. It just makes it a very favorable situation to leverage an exercise in that construct or that setup, right? The other end of it is when we're looking at exercises like front squat during accumulation blocks, when we're working hypertrophy or muscular endurance, the thought is, can we keep localized tension in an area from having mechanical disadvantage position for having a more upright torso and an anterior load? But it doesn't mean that we can't develop relative strength and power with a front squat just because it have a lower ceiling of external loading. And that's the thing I want you to think about. You know, as we're going through this, technique is the only thing that ever really matter, regardless if it's back squat, front squat, split squat, whatever exercise we're doing. Vertical torso, elbows north and south, eyes straight ahead, getting your hamstring down to your calf with every single rep. That's the foundation of a squat, right? That is by definition, a squat. You know, the notion that you have to put your butt back, look your eyes up, all that is erroneous. It doesn't really have any weight or as substance when we're looking at developing athletes or clients and looking at not just the short-term benefit, but the long-term. So as we're thinking through 642, 642, you're thinking a weight that you could hit, not if you were just gonna strip away technique and push your butt back and look up towards the ceiling and drop your torso below your thighs. That is never gonna have a long-term benefit, ever. You gotta think about it, what would I do if I had to keep perfect technique with a 4.0 exo tempo, getting my hamstring down to the calf, whatever logo I have in my shirt, getting my knees aligned over my ankles every single rep, including the heaviest ones on that last set of 2. That's what we want to think about with all of our exercise. Let's move on to practice 2. All right, practice 2 now, we're going to work pull-up, same rep scheme, 642, 642. If you can't do 642 or can't hit 6 reps, you're going to utilize a secondary protocol of 3-2-1, 3-2-1. Ideally, if you can hit 6 reps, you're doing 642, 642. Choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Now, in regards to pull-up versus a chin-up versus a neutral grip pull-up, The idea is now I'm in a pronated grip, I'm in a mechanically disadvantaged position. So opposite of what we just talked about with back squat, I'm mechanically advantaged. Now I can't recruit as much bicep because I'm not on length there, as well as this externally rotated position of that upper arm doesn't have as much of a stretch effect because now I'm more internally rotated in that arm position, and I don't have the ability to, when I'm under length, recruit as much of my bicep, that lat isn't pulled, maybe I don't get as much of my rear delt, teres minor, etc. So when we're going through this exercise, you're gonna feel mechanically weaker. The other aspect of this, and this is important, is it's a lat exercise, right? A lot of times we detach the muscle group from the actual movement pattern because we train movements, not muscles. But the truth is, the whole premise of this is structural balance to have equal distribution of pushing and pulling. So as I'm pulling, I want to think about recruiting my lat. And the best way to do that is keeping your rib cage down and trying to elbow straight down, right? So as I'm pulling, that elbow going straight down by driving my elbows towards the ground is foundational, right? That premise, if we can sit there and go, okay, I'm gonna go 6-4-2, working up to a heavy double on that second wave, or 3-2-1, working up to a heavy single on that second wave, that if I can get there, keeping my body perpendicular to the ground and elbowing the ground, that the chances of myself recruiting way more lat, having way more structural balance from whatever I do in my antagonist movement, in this case on practice number 1 will be a close grip bench with the sphere grip, get ready, or on our practice 4 will be our actual dips, same protocol, 6-4-2, 6-4-2, or 3-2-1, 3-2-1, that I'm gonna have that much more long-term success from not only doing appropriate distribution of pushing and pulling exercises, but executing those equal distribution of pushing and pulling, right? So it's one thing just to do the exercise to align appropriate stress in the anterior and posterior, or the posterior and anterior. But in the case of execution is equal. It's equal of in terms of focus, intent, as well as the way we move our upper arm, our humerus through space. That is the foundational key for all of this. So when you're going through that exercise, keep your rib cage down, brace, grip that bar like you're trying to break it, pull your elbow down to the ground. As you lower it down, keep your elbow back, get your body extended completely, and pull as hard as you can again. Let's move on to practice 3. All right, so practice number 3, trap bar deadlift, 6-4-2, 6-4-2. That's a wave loading protocol. So that second set of 2 will be our heaviest of the day. We just worked a block where we paused for a period of time on the ground. We want to build off of that. Because one of the things that we see with deadlift is that first ascent, that first rep, is our worst rep. And why is that? Let's break that down for a second. There's fluid in our body. When we start to move, that fluid gets momentum. As I start to create momentum in one direction and have a lot of inertia broken, now I start to move in the opposite direction. That fluid is already in motion, so it likes to stay in motion. When I'm static, that fluid doesn't move. So if fluid is in the joint, fluid is in the joint, fluid is in the joint, as I start to open and close that joint, fluid is moving from one end to the other. And what that does is makes that second rep much more efficient than the first rep. Not only that, we are now in a moment where that nervous system's firing adequately. And the difference between a deadlift and a squat in that dead position is we don't have the benefit of a preceding eccentric or lengthening, right? So we're not allowing for fluid to gradually move. We're not allowing to that muscle fiber and that connective tissue to lengthen to create some sort of what we call amerization or reaction. That process of transitioning from that descent into the concentric, that makes that movement a lot easier to manage versus going straight into the ascent or the concentric. So what the message is, and hopefully what we built upon last block from that 8-4 or 8-6-4, 4-6-8 with a 4 count on the ground, gets into this, make that first ascent really, really good. Because 6-4-2, 6-4-2, I'm not worried about the 6, the 4, the 2, or the 6 or the 4. I'm worried about that 2 when that weight's getting up to 90, 95%. Because what will eventually happen is we're going to get hit with a bag of bricks on that first pull, right? So that boom, that hit in the wall. And that's where deadlifts go to die. That's when we're looking at it from the stance of we want you to stand up. And if we don't have good body position, good brace position, maintaining that spinal position, creating a pack centrated shoulder, hip, and ankle, then we're not going to be able to pull as hard as we can. Whether it's a grip thing, whether it's a stability thing, a breath thing, a just actual force thing, doesn't really matter. The point being is as I start to drive up away from the ground, I want to think about all the work we just did in block number 2 of every single rep pausing. 4, 3, 2, 1, drive. There was a reason behind that. In fact, we're going to build upon that within our A series, a dead stop counter or non-counter movement jump with a trap bar. So we're going to pull from the ground up, driving up, each time resetting, pausing, and driving through. So we have intent with light weight, and then we have to have intent with heavy weight with our wave loading protocol. All right, let's move on to practice number 4. All right, so we're going to go for practice number 4, dips. Dips is an exercise that, just like pull-ups, that it's relative strength. So you'll see 2 different options, 642, 642, or 321, 321. If you can do 6, you're doing 642, 642. Just make that choice, right? Now, the other end of it is your position, your torso angle, your elbow position, relatively speaking. The stronger you are, the more range of motion active, which should be preceded by more passive, you'll be able to get more of that shoulder extended position, that elbow back. And what that means is that your body will be more perpendicular. Just like we talked about with pull-up, we want to establish that your body's angle, relatively speaking, to the ground, and then subsequently the movement of that arm changes the recruitment, right? So we talked about this idea of pull up and pulling straight down and keeping a perpendicular position for practice 2 gets more recruitment of the lat. By that same logic, if we're keeping more perpendicular position and getting more shoulder extension or pulling that elbow behind me, I should in theory get more recruitment of my pec. Because very easily, a lot of these positions can get altered by just changing your body's angle, right? So if I'm looking at this from the perspective of that torso and that's the rest of my body is now moving inverted because I lack either shoulder extension or the strength in that position, then I'm going to change the recruitment and then I'm going to change the level of impact from a structural balance and long-term health, right? Or the actual value of the exercise, right? Range of motion, position at that range of motion are 2 fundamental things for exercise execution. So if I have a coach walking around saying, keep that body straight up and down or go a little bit lighter, it's predicated off those 2 drivers, right? And then third one would be control, right? Do you have a lot of flailing elbows? Do you have a lot of kipping or a lot of like motion that's not necessarily a conduit to creating tension in that muscle group that we're trying to work? Those are the thought processes we're going through this. So just like in pull-up or any body weight exercises, that discipline in that execution, maintaining what we call rep integrity, range of motion, position, and then control on every single rep, hitting that target rep number with that time under tension all the way through, right? And you're thinking again, what can I hit for 2 or 1 on my heaviest set on that given day and then over the course of 4 weeks with optimal technique. It's not necessarily how much we can manipulate and contort our body. It's how much we can do things with great effort, with great position, and great range of motion over the course of 4 weeks. Determines really the ultimate outcome. Okay, let's talk about strength now. We're on block number 3, year number 8. So this is a extremely fun and exciting time for us with strength. We want to think about strength as a foundation of really good movement and great exercise selection and focusing on execution. But with that comes an evolution in terms of we now have a lot of members who have been with us for a long time that are ready for a more challenging methods or protocols selection, right? Methods being that you combine exercises, sets, reps, tempo, intensity, and rest, or protocols just looking at all of that minus the exercise, right? We're just focusing on this. So the protocol that we're going to use is escalating density training. So normally we just say, hey, we're going to go up in either 1 or 2 methods with all of our programming. Usually it's go up in weight, which is intensity, or it's go up in volume, which is reps, right? So body weight exercises, you're very accustomed to that. We add reps every single week. So if we can't externally load it, we just say go up in a rep. And if it's a exercise with a dumbbell, kettlebell, or med ball, The idea is to try to go up in weight every single week, right? And that's kind of the hierarchy, right? If we have the ability to externally load it, go up in weight. If we have the ability, we don't have that ability, go up in reps. But in this case, it's neither. It's actually density. And density has two components. One being, can I do more work in the same period of time, which is what we're going to be the focal point here, or can I do the same work in less time? Both are density based. So as I'm looking through to increase each week, you're going to try to use a weight that's challenging, and the target rep number will be about 7 to 8 reps with a target set of hopefully 8 on week 1. That means it's pretty adequate and heavy. But if I'm up towards 12, it's probably too light. So figuring out that medium between the two and then going up each week instead of increasing weight. So it's finding that kind of 8-12 set sweet spot with a 7 to 8 RM load and trying to get more volume within 20 minutes every single week. So practice number 1 is going to be front foot elevated split squat with 2 dumbbells paired up with split squat. So you think about this in terms of execution. So we have front foot elevated. We want to go down the escalator, hamstring down to the calf, chest up. And then we have inverted row, hands on the bar, either legs straight, bent, or elevated. Well, all of those have a different type of impact on relative load, intensity, perspective of grip strength, those things, right? All those things have a systemic impact. But what you want to think about here is, okay, if I have the ability to do, let's just say, a certain weight for 5 reps with a 4 count down with great range of motion and great position on both front foot elevated, split squat, and inverted row, that is your potential. The key is not whether you can manipulate or contort your body to get an outcome. The key is maintaining that and fighting like hell. Maintaining what we call rep and set integrity, getting all your reps with great position, range of motion, and control, and then getting all of your reps within that period of time, let's say in this case 5 with a 4x of tempo at a certain intensity, a 7 to 8 RM load, that's your set integrity. And we want to maintain that for 20 minutes, and whether I get 6 or 14 sets, the point being is all 6 of those are probably better served at being great technique as opposed to 14 with really crappy technique. So that'll be the focal point. Front foot elevated split squat paired up with inverted row. Yes, grip is going to be a governor here. It's going to limit you. That's intentional. I'd rather your grip give out than anything else. So we're going to go front foot elevated split squat, going down the escalator, not the elevator, getting the hamstring down to the calf, keeping your chest up, keeping your front foot in contact with that board the entire time. Inverted row, touching your chest every single time to the bar. Elbow extended on the way out, whether that's your knees bent, legs long, or feet elevated. All the while, it's going to get all of that execution done perfectly every single time. Talk about practice number 2. So escalating density, 20 minutes, 5 reps of A1, A2 with a 4-0 tempo, meaning that we're going down, 4, 3, 2, 1, no pause, up fast, no pause, down. Our 2 exercises for practice number 2 are going to be a dumbbell single arm row. So 2 feet in the ground, feet are parallel to each other. Back is parallel to the ground, pulling 1 dumbbell up as high as we can, keeping that rib cage pushed down. So as I pull, I'm not bending, I'm not contorting, I'm not manipulating. I'm just focusing on contracting that lat, locking it all the way out, 4, 3, 2, 1, resetting and pulling. Paired up with a goblet squat. So elbows tucked in, chin tucked, body completely perpendicular to the ground. Bring your hamstrings down to your calf, driving up. So 4 count down, explosive on the way up. The idea is to try to pick a weight that's 7 to 8 RM, and going towards 8 to 12 total sets, trying to build up each week. Technique, 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 range of motion, control, tempo, heavy intensity, fighting like hell to maintain that all the way through. All right, let's go on to practice number 3. Okay, so we're going to go on practice number 3, kettlebell deadlift, 2 kettlebells, chin tucked, back flat. We want to keep it hingy as possible. Right, so this is getting into, now we have a very high density protocol, and we have exercise that we utilize a lot of different strategies, right? So with kettlebell deadlifts, there's a fixed end position wherever the kettlebell hits in the ground, relatively speaking to your height, your range of motion, your control at that range. The The way we accommodate that is if you don't either have the mobility or strength at that range, you can bend your knees and pull with your legs. And then alternatively, if you don't even have the range of motion, you can just go off of blocks. So here's where this gets a little bit interesting, right? Because you can go heavier if you go off of blocks. You can go heavier than if you were going to go off the ground with a very hingy type of deadlift, if you were going to go from the ground up with a squat type pattern. And then you would have to go lightest if you kept a very hingy vertical shin, almost bringing your torso down to the ground or RDL-like fashion without bending your knees in that position because you're less mechanically advantaged. And what's the right answer here? The answer is start at the beginning. What is optimal technique for a deadlift to recruit as much hamstring glute as possible? It's going to be that very hingy, mechanically weak position. So that might mean that you need less weight than you would normally do if you were to go off of blocks or use a very like squatting up type of manner to come up off the ground. And I know that probably feels maybe counterintuitive based off of this is going to be a training block that you probably are going to push really hard. It's a long 4 weeks, and anyone who's ever gone through escalating density or very high density protocols before, like myself and our staff, would attest to it's better to play the long game and choose mechanically disadvantaged positions with lower systemic load and fight to maintain technique almost to the point of being overly cautious early, because the systemic loading that's going to be on your body, if you're getting 14 sets at a maximal load that you're almost super compensating before because you're accommodating technical variables like bending your knees or going from a reduced range of motion. So if you're normally doing deadlifts off of blocks, that's completely fine. Just stay lighter, work on range of motion, hinging down. If you're squatting on the way up, that's also fine, but I recommend you stay lighter and don't try to go to a default weight that's really heavier. And if you have the ability to do from the ground up with a very hingy vertical shin position, again, that's your kind of standard, work off of that. We're going to pair that up with a half kneeling single arm overhead press. So if I'm on my right knee, that means my right arm's going to press. So as I press from the bottom up, elbow stays in, 4 count on the way down, switch my knee, switch my hand, and we're going to go 5 reps there. So the key on all this is technique, 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 almost to the point where it feels like you are going super slow in a very fast-paced workout. That is the key to EDT. It's making it through some of these workouts by focusing and locking in on what you can control, and whatever happens from a total set number is a product of your preparedness. It's what we call an auto-regulatory block. You got it or you don't. All right, guys, thank you guys. Let's go through this. I hope you guys have a great training block, and we'll see you guys